Dear YouTube, as you know, under copyright law, I am allowed to use portions of copyrighted material, in this case, copyrighted material belonging to the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society of Pennsylvania, so long as this is used for the purpose of criticism and parody. Please remember this when Watchtower comes complaining, because I've embarrassed them by using their propaganda in a way they disapprove of. Thank you. Hello there. Well, I'm back from my adventures across Europe. A lot of you will have seen some of my recent interview videos. There are actually more of them to follow. But basically, I've recently been on a trip with Deanna and my little girl Jessica, and we've been to 2 XJW weddings over the space of maybe 4 weeks. And over that period, I've also interviewed a number of XJWs along the way. So hopefully, as those videos get put up, you'll find them interesting. But I also have a really big job on my hands to try and make sense of the recent Royal Commission videos, which completely caught me by surprise. I think they started being disseminated on YouTube literally as I was getting in the car to go on my kind of long trip, so I was completely caught off guard and not able to respond in the way I would have liked if I'd have been at home and in my normal routine. So they caught me completely off guard, but I am determined to do at least a video about Jeffrey Jackson's comments to the Royal Commission, and in the interests of getting that done, I first want to get this JW Broadcasting rebuttal out of the way, so that my desk is relatively clear. And thankfully, Samuel Hurd, for the August JW Broadcasting episode, tossed me quite a softball. It wasn't really that difficult for me to do a rebuttal for this, because there isn't really that much propaganda in this particular episode, thankfully. In fact, I think the episode more or less speaks for itself, because what you have is Samuel Hurd behaving, or not behaving, but performing in a very wooden and uninterested way, really, for the viewers. So I think most Jehovah's Witnesses will find this JW Broadcasting episode fairly unimpressive anyway, but there were 1 or 2 things I wanted to pick up on, and I'll start with some remarks that Samuel Hurd makes about donations.
In our May program, Brother Lett explained the goal of the governing body to accelerate the building of places of worship and other theocratic facilities. We would like to take this opportunity to thank you for your generous response over the past few months and for your continued support of this all-important work. Thank you very much.
I found this a fascinating clip because it just shows in microcosm Watchtower's ability to revise their own history or whitewash unpleasant facts. So here you have Samuel Hurd saying that in the May broadcast, Stephen Lett outlined the projects for accelerated building work, Watchtower's projects for building Bethels and that kind of thing. And that was what prompted Jehovah's Witnesses to donate money. I have no doubt that a lot of money was donated as a result of that broadcast. But that doesn't really tell the story. What Stephen Lett did in the May broadcast, and by all means go back and check, because I obviously did my own rebuttal to it, Stephen Lett held his hand out and said there is a shortfall between the amount of money that we have coming in and the amount of money we'd like to spend. So in other words, Stephen Lett said, we have a financial problem and we need your help to fix it. None of that is alluded to in Samuel Hurd's comments. Instead, it's a case of, oh, well, we told you we have this project and thank you for the money we've received. I just find it fascinating that only a few months after Stephen Lett's, as I called at the time, historic JW Broadcasting episode, already it's being overlooked, the nature of it and the fact that it was the first time that a governing body member went cap in hand and said, we have a problem and we need you to help us fix it.
Do we sometimes withhold accommodation? Why would we do that? At times we simply forget to tell someone what we appreciated about them.
This is another excellent example of really poor production work. Here you have a sound stage, a studio set that Watchtower admits it spent lots of money on, and for the purpose of producing these supposedly high quality episodes. And you have a producer who can't even be bothered to tell Samuel Hurd, oh, you actually misread that part, you stumbled on that part of the script, do you mind us just doing it again? Well, I say he can't be bothered. It seems more likely to me that he's terrified of telling a governing body member that he fluffed his lines and he needs to do them again. Either that or he's completely incompetent. It's either one or the other.
My name is Alison Williams and I live in Buckingham. We wanted to take our children into an environment where they could blossom and thrive spiritually.
So that all kind of contributed to us thinking, well, why don't we take a trip? Why don't we go and visit Ecuador at least to see?
So here you have a couple from England who decide to basically go and live in Ecuador. They have 2 children, which I'll refer back to in a short while. They have 2 children and they decide to first go and spy out the land for a month, with a view to returning on a permanent basis to serve where the need is greater. And for anyone who's not familiar with Jehovah's Witness lingo and what serve where the need is greater means, it basically means that you select a country that has a greater need for evangelizers, where the preaching work isn't as well supported as it might be, and you go and join them there. And I've known lots of friends, personal friends who've done this, gone to various countries around the world, and I have to say the majority of them are single people or married couples without children. Very rarely do you hear of Jehovah's Witnesses doing this with their children, for reasons that I will explain after this clip.
So it's cooler, which is easier for us Brits. It's a combination of trying to bring together 2 needs. The need that's in the field, but also we have needs as a family to make sure that particularly our children feel comfortable.
So this chap who's taken his family to Ecuador says, well, I'm balancing 2 needs. One is the need in the field, in other words, Watchtower's need, the need for me to gain more followers of Watchtower. And the other need is the need of my children. And he describes it as the need for my children to be comfortable. Now, I don't know precisely what he means by comfortable. I mean, comfortable basically means that his children have a roof over their heads and have food and have everything they need. But I would suggest, I mean, feel free to shoot me down on this one, but I would suggest that moving your school-age children from England to Ecuador is not in their best interests. Why? Because England is a far more developed country, I'm sorry, than Ecuador, and has a far better education infrastructure. So the children's needs will be far better served by living in a country where they can fulfill their potential more fully. Ecuador, that will not happen. They're basically going on an extended holiday to serve the purposes of a cult. They're not realistically going to fulfill their full potential wandering around streets in Ecuador trying to convert people to Jehovah's Witnesses. They will fulfill their potential if they stay in the UK and study hard, and even a rudimentary high school education in the UK will in most cases be enough to get them a good job, but especially if they then go on to college and university, which we all know Watchtower is dead set against, they'll be able to fulfill their potential. But I think this is a fantastic example, or a very sad example, of parents who are putting the organisation ahead of their children's needs. So they've, according to this film clip, they watch this missionary video, Good News to All Nations, and they think, oh, we can do that even though we've got kids. And they decide that they can be, missionaries, and never mind the fact that their children are school age and have needs in terms of education and so forth. I just thought it was very sad, and it ties in again with this ongoing theme that seems to be repeated throughout multiple JW Broadcasting episodes of sacrifice. Sacrifice, sacrifice, sacrifice. Watchtower wants you to do without in order to basically serve them and work for their interests. And it's just sad that on this occasion, 2 young children are missing out on improving their future life prospects just because their parents want to wander around streets in Ecuador recruiting people for a cult.
For a long time, it had been my goal to become a ministerial servant. Just think of how much more I could give to the congregation, to Jehovah. The traveling overseer was visiting our congregation, and I felt confident that I would be appointed. At the next meeting, a special announcement was made to the congregation.
We are very happy to announce the appointment of a new ministerial servant in our congregation. Brother Mark.
Mark? If I wasn't being appointed as a ministerial servant, how could they make him one? He's only 19.
This is obviously a fictitious soliloquy of a man who feels he is overlooked when a circuit overseer visits, and rather than being appointed a ministerial servant, someone else in the congregation who's younger than him is appointed as a servant instead. And it's quite interesting. The theme of this clip is to deal with envy, but I just found it quite intriguing because obviously I've seen firsthand how competitive it can be in a congregation, with brothers wanting to get appointed, wanting to reach out and become ministerial servants or elders. And it's just fascinating that it basically admits in this short film that it all hinges around the visit of the circuit overseer. And you have a situation where the circuit overseer visits and young brothers are falling over themselves to impress the circuit overseer and get in his good books so that it enhances the chances of getting appointed as a ministerial servant or an elder. And I just found it interesting that was sort of touched on here. And I also kind of wanted to point out that in this case, you have what looks like a very, very capable brother, a very, very capable young man who would serve the congregation very well as a ministerial servant. But he's basically overlooked because he lives in a country where there are lots of witnesses, and therefore Watchtower is more able to cherry pick the best witnesses, or the witnesses who have more of a foothold with the body of elders. I'll come to that in a moment. But I basically live in a country at the moment, and I've seen firsthand how basically the road to becoming a ministerial servant or elder is far more fast-tracked in countries like Croatia, where I live, where there are fewer witnesses and therefore fewer capable brothers, and therefore more or less anybody who is willing to not ask questions and to work selflessly and to give of themselves and happens to have the right genitalia can see themselves promoted very, very quickly to becoming ministerial servants or elders. I've seen that firsthand, and there is this huge disparity between countries like the UK, like the United States, where there is a much bigger witness population, and other countries where there's a smaller population, and therefore there's a much more urgent demand for pretty much anyone to be a servant or an elder. And the other thing I wanted to say, I alluded before to the politics of all this. I've seen firsthand for myself, when I was an elder for a year, I sat in on a circuit overseers visit where they were discussing the selection of ministerial servants, and I've seen how petty and, how can I put it, the selection process is very, very biased and weighted towards who the personal preference of the elder is. Never mind how spiritual, how hardworking, how conscientious the brother is who's being discussed. If this brother is not in the good books of certain elders, then they're not going to make it to becoming a ministerial servant or elder. I've seen it for myself, and I can remember having to kind of really put my foot down in one elders meeting when they were discussing a brother for appointment who happened to be my brother-in-law, and they were basically refusing to appoint him because he hadn't put in enough hours. So he was only doing something like 6 hours a month for the last 3 months. And I had to say, well, can I see the record card, please? So I reached out and asked for the record card, and I looked at it and I said, so it's actually just for the last 3 months that he's only been doing 6 hours a month. Do you realise what's happened over that last 3 months? And the elders were like, no. And I said, well, his wife, my sister, has been in hospital with birth complications, with complications with her pregnancy, and he's been looking after her. Before that period, he was doing over 10 hours a month, I think much more than 10 hours a month. And only when I kind of put my foot down on that did they say, oh, okay. And he ended up being appointed. But it's just amazing how those sorts of petty issues get raked over in these elders meetings to discuss appointments. And this whole clip in the JW Broadcasting episode dealing with envy and kind of competition between brothers really brought back some memories from my own experiences in that area.
He invited me home to him and he asked me, can you just explain that for me? Why should I get baptized?
I told Majid and Ziad that I have come to the conclusion, yes, I must be baptized. It is important. What convinced me was the way Jehovah and his organization treats people. Jehovah is not obligated to provide us with a hope for the future, but he does so out of love. He shows us more respect than we show ourselves. And the way the organization is united cannot come from men.
So in this experience we have a refugee, I think from Iraq, who ends up getting baptized, and he gives us here his 4 reasons for becoming a Jehovah's Witness. And bear in mind, he'd been studying for a while and he ended up cancelling the study, but eventually, the chap he was studying with kept in contact with him and kept inviting him to memorials and conventions. And eventually this guy decides, no, I'm going to get baptized. And I found these 4 reasons for getting baptized very interesting, because I assume they're reasons that are endorsed by Watchtower. So he says, firstly he says, the way Jehovah and his organization treats people. That for me would not be a reason to become a Jehovah's Witness. Because, well, first of all, you need to establish that Watchtower is indeed Jehovah's organization, and so far nobody has been able to provide any evidence at all to that end. So it goes back to my main argument, is it true or isn't it? If it's true, you should be able to prove it. If it isn't, if you can't prove it, then your religion is no more credible than any other religion. But as regards the way the organisation treats people, well, you have a very authoritarian, very rule-based, very strict organisation that demeans women, that breaks up families, that values organisational rules over the sanctity of life, that puts children at risk through flawed policies regarding child abuse. I don't think these are laudable ways to treat people, and they're certainly not reasons to join an organisation. The second reason that's given Jehovah is not obligated to provide us with a hope for the future, but he does so out of love. So what he's saying here is the fact that Jehovah's Witnesses offer him a hope for the future is a reason to become a Jehovah's Witness. And what seems to be overlooked is that he's basically saying that anybody who offers a hope for the future should be followed, should be joined. I can offer him a hope for the future. I can just make up randomly a hope for the future and say, if you follow me, I promise you you'll win the lottery. If you follow me, I promise you you'll have a big house and a fancy car and all of these wonderful things. It doesn't mean I can deliver on those promises, but I can certainly give you a promise. And that's all Watchtower's doing. It's giving a promise it can't possibly deliver on. So just giving someone a hope for the future on itself, by itself, is not a reason to follow that person or organisation. The third reason is a little bit weird or ambiguous. He says, Jehovah shows us more respect than we show ourselves. Okay, that's his opinion. The fourth reason he gives, the fourth and final reason, the way the organisation is united cannot come from men. So obviously this chap hasn't studied history that much, or indeed watched much news, because only in North Korea do you have an example of an entire country that is completely and utterly united behind their leaders. But that doesn't make their leaders in any way honourable or credible. All it means is that humans have always been very, very successful at getting large numbers of people to follow a person or organisation. It's called a cult. And just because there is unity in a cult doesn't make the claims of the cult true.
I think we don't need to be afraid that some people will never heard about the truth. If they really want to know that, Jehovah will take care of it. So Jehovah was actually waited for Atta for many, many, many years.
I'm showing this clip purely because of one reason and one reason alone, and that's the fact that you have two witnesses in apparently freezing cold winter conditions, you know, dressed appropriately with their nice warm coats, expecting householders who aren't wearing coats to stand in the cold and listen to them. And this was something that bothered me as a witness when you're preparing. It's a really cold, freezing cold day, and you're preparing for the ministry. You're there with your scarf and your gloves and your coat, and you're going out to speak to people and expecting them to stand in the doorway with freezing cold air rushing into their house. It seems a very sort of selfish thing to do, really.
The branch office in Britain has a large part to play in this growing work, but faces challenges. Its properties are fragmented, spread out over a 10-mile radius. The decision was made to relocate. In 2014, an 85-acre property was purchased to accommodate the new Britain branch office. Right now, the site is being prepared for construction. A small army of volunteers will then fit out the property, turning the site into a beautiful new Bethel home. It is expected that these new facilities will be completed and operational by December 31st, 2019. At that time, the Bethel family will move in. Here, in this very office, skilled volunteers are hard at work designing the new branch. There are structural engineers, architects, interior designers, landscapers, solicitors, and so many more. Each willingly gives of their time without charge. Building this branch is a huge task. Jehovah has always loved using willing volunteers on construction projects, such as the Ark, the Tabernacle, and the Temple. Jehovah is no different today.
So as you've probably gathered, Watchtower is doing pretty much what they did in Brooklyn, also in London. So in Brooklyn you had a situation where historically the organisation had accumulated a lot of separate buildings that are now worth a huge amount of money because of their location. And because of their value, Watchtower was able to sell them for around $1 billion, or I should say at least $1 billion, and basically do a property flip. So in other words, sell off those properties and buy a much cheaper plot of land and build far more cheaply upstate, and basically rake in this huge windfall of cash from doing that. They've done the same thing in London, or they will be doing the same thing in London. It's a similar situation. I don't know whether you visited London, Bethel, but you basically have two fairly large complexes on Mill Hill. One is IBSA House, the other is Watchtower House, and spread around those complexes for quite a large area you have these individual buildings and houses and apartment blocks that are owned by Watchtower. Watchtower knows that if they sell all their property in London, they can afford to do the same thing as they've already done successfully, or are doing, in America. Now, what I found interesting about this video is that there seems to be no hesitancy about really pushing this whole building thing. You're shown this office where lots of witnesses are busily working on drawing up plans and preparing this project. You know, I don't know how many people are in that office, but it seems quite a large number of people and resources that are being devoted not to spiritual work, not to preaching, not to serving the congregations, but purely to a thing, to property, to bricks and mortar, to material things. And the fact that Watchtower is really pushing this, and even saying things like, oh well, Jehovah needs buildings, Jehovah had his people build the tabernacle and the ark and the temple, and this is just a continuation of this grand building project that Jehovah has. Well, actually, building wasn't such an obsession in the Bible. Yes, you have these occasional instances where God's people are required to build something, but nowhere near to the same level of obsession as Watchtower seems to have with these, oh, we must build, build. And it's getting to the stage where in almost every JW broadcasting episode now, you have some reminder of the urgency of the building work and something being built somewhere. And as I've already argued, that would be fine if the membership was skyrocketing. You'd think, well, it's understandable, they need to build more buildings to make up, to keep pace with these skyrocketing membership numbers. No. The membership is stagnating. It's crawling along at something like 2% growth per year. And when you factor in the fact that the Earth's population is growing by 1% anyway, just through the births and deaths ratio, that is not something to write home about. So there is no real justification for this urgent property building work other than the obvious financial incentives of selling property in desirable locations that's worth more, and building attractive property in one parcel that is easily sellable in the future if things deteriorate. That's how I see it. If I'm a witness watching this, I'm not being filled with pride that I'm a member of an organisation that is completely fixated with building stuff.
Of course, I was always happy when I won. But that happiness didn't last very long. Every time I won a race, I would be expected to win the next one, and I was overwhelmed with tremendous pressure. That frightened me, so I immersed myself in training. Train, race, train, race. I was racing down a road with no end in sight.
So you have this experience from a Japanese sister who is basically a pioneer. She did leave pioneering for a period because of her health, but she's now a pioneer again. And she tells the story of how she used to be an athlete. She used to be a winning cyclist. She won various games, and she had a successful career ahead of her. But she basically denounces all this and says, oh, well, I was under so much pressure. It wasn't enough to win one race. I had to win the next one and the next one and the next one. And she recounts this as though it was some traumatic experience that she had in her youth. And apparently we're supposed to feel sorry for the fact that she had a successful athletics career. I would argue that, you know, yes, winning is important in sports, but that's part of the job description. If you're into sports, it's because you enjoy it and you understand that you will get more success and more money if you win things. And nobody is forcing you to be an athlete or be a sportsman or woman. It's something that you do because you enjoy it. So I found this whole aspect of you know, telling a sob story and trying to get people's sympathy over the fact that she was required to win things very, very unconvincing.
Even so, I just wasn't able to believe in the existence of a creator, so I studied the creation book. When I read about the structure of birds' wings, my eyes were opened. I thought, there is a creator. The creator made this.
So this is the book that the sister refers to as having convinced her basically away from being an atheist into a believer, not just in God, but specifically in Jehovah and a God who selected an organization in the first part of the 20th century to represent him. So this is the book that did it for her. Now, what a lot of witnesses watching this video might not understand is that this is an extremely discredited book now. There is a reason why Watchtower released the Creator book to replace this, and it's because if you Google this book and try to do some digging on it, you find that there are numerous misquotes in this book. It's peppered with examples of intellectual dishonesty, where Watchtower has taken what a scientist or Watchtower has taken what a biologist has said, or an evolutionist, and has completely warped it to give their arguments more force. And just to give an example, I'm actually going to put a link in the description of a page on JW Facts where Paul Grundy produces a table of misquotes, so you can see for yourself some examples. I'm not just making it up. But one of the one source of criticism of the creation book is actually this book, Richard Dawkins' The God Delusion. And I realise I'm instantly going to upset a lot of religious subscribers, but don't worry, I'm not going to go on this huge atheist rant and tell everyone to buy it. But I wanted to just quote to you from where Richard Dawkins talks about the book, Life, How Did It Get Here, by Evolution or by Creation? Because he actually devotes, let me see, about 3 pages to talking about this book. So he has a lot to say on it, and I did consider reading the whole passage, but I'm actually just going to read the beginning and end, just to give you a flavour of what Richard Dawkins has to say. He says on page 144 under the title Irreducible Complexity, it is impossible to exaggerate the magnitude of the problem that Darwin and Wallace solved. I could mention the anatomy, cellular structure, biochemistry and behaviour of literally any living organism by example, but the most striking feats of apparent design are those picked out, for obvious reasons, by creationist authors, and it is with gentle irony that I derive mine from a creationist book, Life, How Did It Get Here? With no named author, but published by the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society in 16 languages and 11 million copies, is obviously a firm favourite because no fewer than 6 of those 11 million copies have been sent to me as unsolicited gifts by well-wishers from around the world. So basically Jehovah's Witnesses have been sending Richard Dawkins copies of Life, How Did It Get Here by Evolution or by Creation, thinking, oh well, if he only read this book, Professor Dawkins would correct his ways. But he goes on to list a number of examples of where Watchtower gives faulty argumentation and faulty reasoning in trying to discredit evolution. And then he concludes that his last mention of the creation book is on page 146, 147, and I'll read the final paragraph. He says, "The process by which plants, whether tiny pimpernels or massive Wellingtonias, acquire the energy to build themselves is photosynthesis." Watchtower again. There are about 70 separate chemical reactions, quoting from the creation book. There are about 70 separate chemical reactions involved in photosynthesis, one biologist said. It is truly a miraculous event. Green plants have been called nature's factories, beautiful, quiet, non-polluting, producing oxygen, recycling water and feeding the world. Did they just happen by chance? Is that truly believable? No, it is not believable, but the repetition of example after example gets us nowhere. Creationist logic is always the same. Some natural phenomenon is too statistically improbable, too complex, too beautiful, too awe-inspiring to have come into existence by chance. Design is the only alternative to chance that the authors can imagine. Therefore, a designer must have done it. And science's answer to this faulty logic is also always the same. Design is not the only alternative to chance. Natural selection is a better alternative. Indeed, design is not a real alternative at all because it raises an even bigger problem than it solves. Who designed the designer? Chance and design both fail as solutions to the problem of statistical improbability because one of them is the problem and the other one regresses to it. Natural selection is a real solution. It is the only workable solution that has ever been suggested. And it is not only a workable solution, it is a solution of stunning elegance and power. So I just wanted to read that, not just to go on about evolution, but just to explain that this book, this creation book that JW Broadcasting is, promoting, has been thoroughly debunked by well-known authors and in numerous places online. And it just simply isn't an argument anymore. It's not a credible source of information on the subject of how life got here.
In this system, we think we have a lot of time in our lives, but in reality, we don't. People should live thinking about what is really important in life in the time they have. Of course, we can learn from the things we experience. But the wise course is to learn from the truth and from our relationship with our Creator. I really want young people to learn that lesson. The road with real value is not the one we take for ourselves. It is the road we take for the Creator.
Or more specifically, the road we take for Watchtower. I just found this probably the most disturbing part of this month's episode, where you have this Japanese sister basically evangelizing her views that serving the organization is the only path to take, evangelizing those views specifically for young people. So again, young people are singled out and told that they should put their lives on hold and suspend any kind of personal betterment in favor of serving the organization. And I found it interesting that she referred to the fact that life is short and our short time needs to be spent wisely. Well, that's precisely why young people should avoid getting roped into pioneer work and being cult promoters. It's because life is too short to waste it on nonsense. It's sad that this Japanese sister has wasted so much of her life on it. But again, it all boils down to the basic question, is it true or isn't it? If it's true, then great, show us evidence. If it's not true, then don't waste a second of your time on it.
Now is the time for preaching with zeal. We'll never give up or give way to fear. And now is the time to show how we feel. Now that the final days are here.
So I'm closing on this month's song. No, I'm sorry, I don't have time to do my own version on this occasion. But I'm closing on this month's song for two reasons. One is it seems to be veering alarmingly towards being a happy clappy gospel song. So it's just amazing that JW Broadcasting is venturing so far into the territory of televangelism, and even the songs now are starting to mimic the kind of happy clappy gospel-y music that you would expect to see on Christian channels. But the second thing I wanted to point out was these words are just amazing in their irony. You have this chorus that says, now is the time for preaching with zeal. We'll never give up or give way to fear. We'll never give way to fear. And now is the time to show how we feel now that the final days are here. Now, I would suggest that you are giving way to fear if you're orienting your life around the idea that mankind is doomed unless it listens to the commands of 7 blokes in New York. It's all about fear-mongering, the message of Jehovah's Witnesses. It's all about tying people into a state of perpetual guilt and perpetual self-loathing. As I've mentioned before, I get contacted by people who have been out of the organisation for decades, and only after a significant amount of time out of the organisation in a disfellowship state do they finally wake up and realise that for all of that time they were trapped in this cycle of fear and self-loathing and assuming that they were going to be destroyed at Armageddon. That is the sort of control that fear gives you. And so I just found it amazing that in the same chorus, Watchtower can suggest that Jehovah's Witnesses are not ruled by fear, but also remind witnesses that the final days are here, and very soon anybody who doesn't agree with the governing body will be pecked at by birds. So yeah, I thought I just wanted to conclude on that. Hopefully this video will be much shorter than the 2-hour epics I have to make for other JW Broadcasting episodes, because as I've said, there's less to pick apart in this one, which I'm grateful for. I'm now going to get on with getting the rest of my interview videos from my Europe trip uploaded so that you can enjoy those. And I also need to get my teeth into finally looking at some of the amazing material that came out of the Australian Royal Commission into institutional responses for child abuse. So hopefully you'll have some feedback from me on that subject very soon. But in the meantime, I hope you've enjoyed this video, and thank you for watching.